Did you know, I didn't, that the Earth has a long tail stretching away from the sun, somewhat like the plasma component of a comet? No. I didn't either until I explored the website of our speaker today, Dick Kaufman, who is a physicist and was a professor and a researcher at the University of New Hampshire for many, many years. And some of his time he spent studying the thermodynamics of the Earth's plasma sheet. Fortunately, he's not going to talk to us about that. But if there is a thunderous demand, I'm sure we can get him to prepare a lecture on that subject. So scuba diving is not really his profession, it's his hobby. And he learned scuba dive at the University of New Hampshire along with a group of students about 1972 in the New Hampshire University swimming pool. But they had to do their diving tests, and my wife knows all about this, going out to the coast of New Hampshire, the coast of Maine, where the water can be pretty darn cold. And he then started doing a lot of scuba diving, but he didn't get a camera till I think 1981, and an underwater camera, and so everything he's going to show us is from the 100 or so dives that he took from beginning in 1981 with his camera in the coast of New England and in the Caribbean. And so without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our own Dick Kaufman.
Well, as Bob just said, I started taking photographs in 1982 or something like that. And here's the camera that I used. This is the Nikon F3, and it was very popular in those days, and particularly good for taking underwater photography things. So they made these cases, that plastic case for underwater, to bring under the water, and you could do all the adjustments you needed to with all these knobs and stuff on the case. You had to focus the camera, this is in the 80s, you had to focus the camera, you had to adjust the light, you had to push a button to make the picture, you had to push another button to advance the film, because it was a film cameras. And that's the same camera I use all the time. This thing up in the top here is a strobe light, and you have to take all pictures underwater using a strobe or a flash unit, because the colors are completely wrong if you use ray light on this wet sunlight. Gets down to different depths. It changes the color completely. And the other thing is that's on this little arm here, and this thing under it is just a regular flashlight, so you'll know where the strobe light is pointing, because the strobe light doesn't do anything until after you push the button. And so you can put the light though close to the animal or far away or wherever you want to do with it. So the things, here's the places that I went diving. The one up in the upper left-hand corner there is Cozumel. These were the pictures were from in the Caribbean. The Cozumel is up here. That's off the Yucatan Peninsula, the south part of Mexico. There's Little Cayman Island, and that's near the Grand Cayman, which probably more people are familiar with, south of Cuba, that green thing above it. Over in the far right is Dominica, which is an island in this long chain of the Lesser Antilles. And down at the bottom, just above Venezuela, is another chain of islands, and I used Bonaire as the one that I had pictures for on there. So that, plus of course, a lot of dives in this local area, we'll see here. And I'm going to try to look at the different animals. I'm starting with the very most primitive animal that you can take pictures of, or that exists here. And this is a sponge. It's the same thing as they used to use for sponges, really. It's that they used to take these animals out of the water, dry them out, and sell them as sponges. So they have a characteristic like a sponge does. In other words, it has holes all through the thing. And it's very unorganized, very primitive. It has a lot of kinds of cells inside of it. Some make the skin of the skin of the sponge, the yellow stuff, and some are inside. Some generate that skin. Some of them will pump water into the skin's body from those holes along the edges here on the outside. Some of them will pump water out of the sponge, this to go back to the ocean, and while it's in the sponge, some of these cells digest something, but they're not organized in any way. There's no stomach, for instance. They can use this, whatever animals come in and digest them, but it's done all over the body of the thing, of the animal. There's no organs like we normally think of, and that's the most ancient type of thing that is in the ocean that you can take a picture of. So here's what they look like, the sponges. Now, these are local ones. When I say local, I mean off the coast of New Hampshire and southern Maine. And you see a lot of little holes all through them. Those are the things that they really used to dry and make sponges out of. This is the ones that you have in the Caribbean, and they look prettier, usually. Most things in the Caribbean look a lot prettier than the ones up here. This is a little Cayman island, and these are called, they're given common names. This is called tube sponge because it looks like a tube. This is the one that's, there's no reason for it to be a tube or any particular shape because there's nothing organized in the body. There's digestion taking place everywhere, and everything is all mixed up. So it can have any shape, and this pink thing is a sponge, the top of one, and it's got something inside it, you can see, that looks like a flower or a bush that's growing out, but it's another kind of animal, and we'll get to that. It's called a crinoid, that type of animal. And then here's a whole barrel. This is a bigger part of, it's a different sponge, but it's the same type as that last one. The one that's got big open hole in it, and the sponge part is all around the edges. And then they have different shapes. They just call it a vase sponge because it sort of looks like a vase. This is one from a different island, and it's got more defined holes in it, but it's the same kind of animal as the other ones. So that's the sponges and the oldest things. Yeah. Now, the zoologists name animals in different groups of animals and group them together that have something in common with each other. And these are called Cnidaria, the big group here. Whoops. Cnidaria, that is the group, and the sea anemones is the first thing in the group that I was going to show. These sketches over on the right show something about sea anemones. And they have, they're a little more developed than the sponges. They have tentacles up here, a group of tentacles. And you see a lot of animals have a lot of tentacles like that. And they go and catch some food that the animal might be able to digest. And what they do is then the animal sort of turns itself inside out. It takes all those tentacles and goes in through this thing that's called a mouth and into this place where they digest food. So this has got a stomach to it. It's one place in the animal and everything gets digested that comes in. And the tentacles themselves try to collect stuff that the animal's going to want to eat. And this one has a really funny, this particular sea anemones have a pretty strange way of getting that. One way, at least, is this, they have these little barbs that can shoot out with a string or a thread attached to them, and they catch something and pull it into the tentacles. But the tentacles often are sticky. They have shocks. They shock animals to get them. And different ways of getting different animals. You see that characteristic of tentacles and getting them back in the animal is common for lots of different animals in the ocean. So these are what they look like locally here. So there are a lot of these around, and you see these are all tentacles. There are maybe hundreds or maybe 1,000 tentacles sticking out of that one animal. There's some little ones here that you can see a little bit better the structure. These are tiny little baby anemones, and you can see the ring around the mouth is, whoops. So here's another one. The mouth is here, and there's a bunch of tentacles around it in sort of a circle. And so all this stuff gets pulled into the animal. This particular animal is a little one, and it's sort of hidden in the rocks. And a lot of animals are hidden in the rocks, and all you see is the tentacles coming out from the rocks. This is what happens when they pull the tentacles inside, and they're just, and these things here, all the tentacles are inside these animals, so they're sort of turned inside out. And over here you can see a little bit of the tentacles. These bigger ones haven't quite closed all the way yet. So you can see a little evidence of them there. But then the next thing they do is, they have different patterns on some of the ones. And this is one that's putting the tentacles out again after it's digested the food from it. And here they're all completely out. So that's what an anemone is in the local area up here. Now in the Caribbean they have them too, but they're much thicker tentacles. These are and there are much fewer of them than they are in that one that had hundreds of thousands maybe of tentacles. And these animals pretty much all stay hidden in the rock, and all you see is the tentacles come out like this, and they catch the food, and then they go into the animal. I deleted a few things here. This is another animal that's in that same group that was the Nidaria group, and it's called hydroids, and it looks like a bush. A lot of the animals look like bushes in here, but the animals are really these little dots along the stems that look like stems of the bush. The stems are not things like plant stems where they put food transport food and water along the stems. They're just to hold the hydroids up. So all these little things are hydroids. This is one type of hydroid. And let's see if I get a single thing. Here's another one. The pink purple thing there is another hydroid. They just have different shapes. These are called sometimes fern hydroids because they sort of look like ferns. But anyway, they're different kinds of hydroids. Now the next thing in this big phylum, or this big group of animals, are the corals. And there are basically two kinds of corals. One is a hard coral and one's a soft coral. These are hard corals, and they're just like rocks. What they're made of is all these little dots, and I'll show you the better picture of them later. All these little dots here are coral animals. And they live in the ocean, and then they die eventually, and they leave their skeletons on the rocks here, on these boulders. And they usually have there's a little white area here where they're probably dead, most of them. And then the new ones grow over. So the only thing that's living is this very thin outer skin of the rocks here, of these coral. And all inside are the skeletons of dead animals. So here's a closer look at some of these. You can see some of these little animals here. These are called the star corals because they sort of look like little circles or stars. These things here look like flowers growing out of it, but they're worms. They're the tentacles of worms. And these are sort of an odd one that I put this picture in. They spiral around like this, and the tentacles sort of in a neat little order. And they're just called Christmas tree worms because we'll see worms later. They're more advanced animals than this. And here are some of the little tiny star corals when they're not on a boulder, and they spread out more. And they can be all different kinds of shapes, but they have this thing that they have a circular range of little parts to them. And then when they go when they grow on a big boulder, they get squished all together. And so this is what if you look at them closely, these are all little corals, and they're squashed together, and so they all pretty much round when you squash them together like that. There's a different kind. This is another hard coral, and it's called a brain coral because it sort of looks like an animal's brain. But it's really made up of lots of little animals that but they're not circular. They're sort of odd shapes like that. And so here's a close-up picture of what those little animals look like. They got a lot of little segments like a worm sort of, but they also form exactly the same kind of thing, a hard coral, just like the round ones did. And this is one, this is a different hard coral down here, this tan stuff. And it's alive. It's just a different color than that green one that was there before. But this thing that's growing on it is a soft coral. And these soft corals are just like most animals. They live and then they die, and they don't form boulders or anything like that. They don't leave their skeletons around. They just are just other animals. And so they come all different shapes though, and colors and stuff. You can see this would be like water must be flowing from the left to the right, and you see all these rods which are those soft corals. They are swept along by the water, the currents. And here's another one. This is a fairly common type of soft coral. It's a sea fan, And those fans will wave back and forth in the water. Say if a fish went by or something like that and made the water move, it would move with it. So those are the soft corals. There's another sea fan. Then the next group of animals, these will become more familiar as they go on because you'll know these more advanced animals. These are the mollusks, and there's a lot of shellfish, sort of. This is these are like worms, like a snail, sort of. And these are like a whelk, exactly, of seafish, animal, but it's the body of the animal's inside this hard shell, and it protects the animal. And the only one in this group of animals, this is a group of different animals all in the same mollusk group, but the only one that doesn't have a hard shell, this is one called a nudibranch, and that's what's sort of sketched over here. It's a soft body animal, but instead of having a hard shell on it, it's got these tentacles, and the tentacles are not for getting food on this animal, they're for keeping other things away, so it'll sting some animal that tries to eat this one. So we'll look at what these look like. Well, first of all, this is something you have in the dining room fairly frequently, mussels, and you see it in all the grocery stores. This is a big snail. You may be familiar with the little ones that crawl on rocks, but this is a great big snail. So there are all kinds of snail-type things. Here's an octopus. This is not a very good picture, I know. This is the head of the octopus here, and these are 2 of the 8 arms. The trouble is the octopuses only come out at night, and I didn't have a very good picture of any. This is that nudibranch I mentioned. This is a local one in this area, and these are the things that these tentacles here are for stinging purposes, not for eating purposes. By the way, these animals all can move. The other ones couldn't move, like a snail could crawl around slowly. Here's just another one of those nudibranches in a warmer climate, in the coral area. By the way, those nudibranches that I just mentioned, those are the mollusks that I mentioned all have a higher level of organization than the previous ones. These animals all have some kind of circulatory system. They have a heart and very simple nervous system, but not very advanced. And they have blood vessels and so forth. The next group of animals here is the worms, and they're more advanced than those other ones. They have a more advanced systems, all those same systems, but more advanced. They have more advanced digestive system and more advanced nervous systems and so forth. So the sedentary worms, those are the ones that we saw with that Christmas tree kind of pattern of tentacles on it. And what they do is they bury themselves into the coral or into a rock, and they stay there. And they just put these tentacles out, and then they bring them in and put them out like when they want to eat something. These kind of worms are ones that swim in the water or crawl on the ground. And so we can look at some of these. These are the flat worms that are crawling around, and they're protected by some stuff on the bodies usually. So these are more pretty, these kind of worms like this kind. This is one that's swimming, and here's another one. And they're all segmented, all these worms are, and this one has little things that look like bristles here, so let's call it a bristle worm. And that's a sponge in the background. And this is what the tentacles of the sedentary worms look like. They often look like flowers. That's one, and here's another. And so each of the worms has one of these flower-type things that are coming out. So this place has like dozens of worms on it probably. And they're all putting out these different, each one puts out their own tentacles, and there are these circles that look like a flower, more or less. Then they get to the more common things here. The arthropods, and this is a list of the ones that we'll see pictures of. An arthropod means that it has jointed, some joints on it. So these have legs usually. The other animals up to here are very slow at moving. These can move much faster because they have legs and they can run. This is the most common one here. It's a regular lobster in this area. And the characteristics of this is the left arm of the lobster, left claw, is usually the bigger one, and it's got these soft, the smooth teeth on it. These white things are called the teeth of the claw. And those are used to crush other animals, like a shell of a snail or something. And then the right-hand claw has got these little sharp teeth. It's a smaller claw, but sharper teeth, and they pull the animal out of the thing that they just crushed, or the other one. And occasionally you find one that's backwards like this. There are different species of lobsters. This one you see has its left claw is a small one, its right claw has the one that's a crushing thing. But most of them are the way that the first one was. The lifetime of these lobsters is that they have these hard shells on. And so they grow, they hit up to they get too big for the hard shell. And what they do is they grow a second soft shell inside that hard shell. And then as they grow, the hard shell splits open, or so it molts like a molding thing, and it falls off, and they get covered by the soft shell. But the soft shell doesn't protect them very much right away, so they hide in these caves like this until the shell hardens up enough so they can come out and try to catch other things to eat. And these are what lobsters look like, though, in the Caribbean. They don't look very much like our lobsters. They don't have claws, those big front claws. They have these antennas sticking out, but not claws. They have a tail sort of like our lobsters, and they have legs. And this is another picture of that one. This one happens to be a spotted one with all those white spots, but there are some that don't have white spots, and it's just a different species of the lobsters in the Caribbean. And this one has heavier antennas like this. But some of them don't look anything like what we'd expect a lobster to be. This is one. You see, it's got a tail here, it's got legs, but this rest of it doesn't look much like our lobsters. So the ones in the Caribbean are quite different from the ones here, but they're all still considered to be lobsters. Then there are crabs. These are the local ones. They're what you get crab cakes from. And the crabs all look sort of crab-like. I mean, you would recognize these probably as crabs. And this is one in the Caribbean, and this is the whole thing, and you'd probably recognize that as a crab too. They look sort of much more similar than the lobsters do. And then these are things that are local again. These are hermit crabs, and what they do is their front claws and their front legs have hard shells on them, but their body doesn't. So the other crabs have their bodies all inside a hard shell. This one does not. And so what they do is they walk on the ground and try to find seashells from dead animals, and one that sort of fits them, and they put that over their back part, which is a soft part, so they don't get eaten. And when they grow too big, then they just throw away that one and look for another shell that fits them better. And this is one that happens to be on a lobster trap, and this is one just walking on a rock. So this is one with a squelch-type shell on it. So they all look pretty much the same. I haven't seen these, though, in the Caribbean. I don't know if they exist there, but there's lots of them around here. And this is just the opposite. This is a shrimp, and there are lots of them in the Caribbean and in southern parts of America, too, but not up here, as far as I know. And this is a barnacle, which is all over the place, but not probably wanted any place. Then these are echinoderms, is the next species, it's a group of animals, and the sea stars, or the starfish, are the most common ones around here, and sea urchins. But we'll look at the different ones. So these are starfish. There's a whole bunch of them, and I'll go to the single one, and you can see the details of it. These dots all over it are hard things, and they're protecting the top layer of the starfish. The bottom underside of it is a soft material, and it's got the suckers on it. And these are pretty heavy legs they have, and they grab onto mussels or clams and can open them up if they pull long enough and hard enough. And then they eat the animal if they open the shell on. It also has this little dot here, and what the suckers on the bottom do is they pull water into the sea star, or the starfish, and it goes out through this little hole here. But the little hole is really a filter or like a filter paper in their coffee maker, or a screen, a very fine screen. And it sort of keeps most of the little tiny animals that this starfish might be able to digest. It keeps it inside and just lets water out. This is what the brittle stars look like. These are mostly in the Caribbean, and they have 5 legs, just like the starfish that we have, but they don't look very much other than that like a starfish that we see. They got a little tiny body. These legs are called brittle because they break easily, and so you see them often broken off partway through. And they're very thin, so they have these tentacles out all along them, but they're still classified as starfish, even though they look quite different than the ones we have. Now this is a really, really clear day in New Hampshire. Normally the visibility is, on a good day, is about 10 feet. And here you can see these sea urchins all over this big rock area. And they're fairly popular with the scuba divers sometimes. They're the ones who were trying to make a living diving, and scuba diving, because they can get big. Should show that close up. You see all the spines on these things. They're fairly soft spines, and you can pick them up easily with your hand. They don't hurt you generally. So they can pick up big bags of these things, and they're very popular in Japan. They make a kind of sushi from the gonads of these called uni, and they're very expensive. So they make money on that way. These are what the sea urchins look like in the Caribbean, and these things that stick out from them are much harder, very hard, and very sharp, and you can't pick those things up very easily at all without getting stuck with it. These are sand dollars and local ones, and they have 5 little parts around them, but this is just one big shell, so there are 5 parts inside, so it's something to do with a starfish. That's a single sand dollar, and this is one from the Caribbean. Looks pretty much the same. This is I turn this one over, and that's the mouth here of the thing that's usually on the bottom, and that's where it gets food from. Oh, this is that same kind of thing that I showed in the early one with the sponge, with something growing in the sponge. This is this crinoid, and this is the same classification as these other things we've just been watching. The animal actually stays hidden in this rock, and just these tentacles come out like they often do, and then they pulls them in and gets food from them, just like many of those other animals. This is a sea cucumber, and this one these are usually about maybe 3 or 4 inches in diameter and 6 or 12 inches long. They're rather popular. They're fairly simple animals. They take water in one end, and it goes all through the animal and comes out the other end, and they digest whatever they get while it's going through. They're fairly popular in China, and like we have fish farms here, and they do in Europe, and a lot of fish farms where you grow fish to eat. Well, the Chinese grow them too, but they also grow sea cucumber farms where they grow a lot of these animals. And there's another different kind of sea cucumber. And there's the end of one, and this thing that sort of looks like an eye is actually that hole that the water goes in and goes through the animal. Then the last of these big phylums is the chordata, which includes the regular fish that you're most familiar with. It includes one other crazy thing, this tunicate here. That looks like a really basic, simple animal. It's got just an input thing, a little basket here, a digestive system, gonads, and an exit thing. But it's apparently something important in the evolution of the vertebrate animals with bones in them. So it doesn't have bones. I don't know why they put it in this category, but anyway, something to do with that. And these are the other things that are more familiar with turtles, rays, bony fish. We'll look at those. This is one of those tunicates that I just mentioned. This looks like the one output and one input. They actually have lots of different versions of these, but I just showed one. There's turtles sitting on the bottom of the ocean with some coral around it, I guess. This is a turtle coming out of the ocean, and what they do is they come out, they dig a hole in the sand, they bury the eggs in it, then they cover it over, and then they go away and never come back again. But maybe 2 or 3 months later, a lot of little turtles come out and they walk themselves into the ocean and go take their own, so they're pretty separated. And they just happen to be where there's a bunch of kids and playing in the ocean there. This is another kind of turtle. So the turtles all are turtle-like. There's one swimming. This is a electric ray or a stingray. And this is in the local area, and the water is so dirty, you couldn't take a picture much farther away than this, or it just all completely blurred out. So the animal's much bigger than this, but this is all I could see on that, take a picture of in the local area, and there's one swimming. But when you go to the Caribbean, the water is so much clearer. You can see this is the whole animal, and you can see the whole thing very clearly. And that's the difference between the water in New Hampshire and the water in the Caribbean. This is something like the stingrays, except it doesn't have a stinger. That one gives you electric shocks. This one doesn't. That's a skate. And it's similar in that both of them don't have bones, but they have cartilage. And then those wings sort of flop around when they're swimming. Here's a little closer up picture of part of the face part of that animal. Now the rest of these are all going to be animals that have bones, the bony animals, and that's most of the fish. And so these are the ones you get locally, and they're not very pretty looking, most of them. This is pretty much camouflaged. Sea raven, there's a couple of them. There's sculpins. So you wouldn't probably put these things in your aquarium if you had one around. And that's typical of this one is a little better looking. This is the closest I could find in the Caribbean to anything that looked like that. This is only the scorpion fish has sort of a camouflage thing too. There's flounders are in both places, and they're a weird animal. When they're little, very tiny animals, they look just like a fish, a normal fish. But you notice right now, this big one has eyes that cross here horizontally, and the mouth looks like it goes vertical. And what happened is when it was just a tiny animal, it would look like a regular fish. It was round like a fish, sort of, and it had a mouth across and the two eyes above it. But when it starts to get older, the eyes migrate over to one side of the mouth, and then it spreads out into a flat thing like this instead of a normal fish shape. And so it has two eyes on the top and no eyes on the bottom, and it's always sitting on the bottom of the water, or most of the time, and it can hide very well. The patterns on the thing very similar to the patterns in the region where they live. So this is easy for scuba divers to get because they just sit there in the ocean often and can be speared very easily. But this is one in the Caribbean, and you see it's much more hidden. And you can see this is in the sand here, and this is the pattern on it. It's very similar to what it's lying on. And they've sort of buried themselves. Here's one that's half buried. So you can see the eyes here, but not much else because it's buried in the sand. That's why they often sit there waiting for something. Those are just one of the eyes on it. This is something that people here are familiar with. You find these in the ocean up around here fairly often. You don't find them in the little islands in the Caribbean that I showed before in that map, because their only tourists are scuba divers. But if you go to a big island like Hawaii, you find them there too. So those are things you find often. Now the rest of the things are all going to be fish. And these are Caribbean fish, and they all look sort of nice. I mean, these ones, any of these you probably have in an aquarium. So these are soldier fish, they're called. The black bar, which refers to the, go backwards here. The black bar refers to this little stripe up here, but there's other fish in the background there. Those are called grunts. We'll see some of those later. Here's a porcupine fish, and what they have is these little spikes like this, little things that stick out, but they're all sort of laid up along their body normally when they're swimming. But when they get in danger, they can blow themselves up by sucking in water to about 3 times that size, and then those things stick out like a porcupine. This is one that has a little bit of thing stuck out, but it's not really much. these things sticking out of the animal. But it sticks way farther out and it gets 2 or 3 times bigger than that when it's in danger. These are just a bunch of other fish, and I'll just go through these real quickly. I mean, they're just all kinds of fish in here. Trunkfish. Let's see. There's another picture of a trunkfish. Triggerfish, filefish. The tangs, there are different color ones. There's a white one, and there's a bunch of blue ones. There's butterfly fish. They're just dozens of fish. I mean, they're all sort of nice looking. There's the grunts, that, like we saw in a couple in the earlier slide. More grunts. These are snappers. A lot of these fish have yellow on them for some reason. I don't know why that is. It's called squirrelfish. This parrotfish is one that has a very small mouth, and but strong, and it goes around eating coral all the time, eating the corals. This is a funny thing. It's got a hind as a type of fish, but this is a white fish with red dots, and the other hinds are red fish with white dots. This one, the long, thin one, is a trumpet fish, and these little ones here are goatfish. And the trumpet fish often hide in a lot of places, and there's a couple of pictures. And there you see some of these other urchins. These spikes here are all those very sharp spiked urchins. Then there are black and white fish, and here's a couple of them. This one has this big dorsal type fin or something going straight up, and the eye is always underneath one of the black bars on it, so you can hardly see the eyes. I don't know, there's a lot of fish that have that characteristic though. This is another kind of fish, sort of like that. It again has a big dorsal type fin or whatever it is, but it's got stripes and dots too, and there's actually a third one back here that you can't see very well, and another one of those urchins. There are a lot of eels. This is the eels that look like snakes, and they snake along the ground. This is a moray eel, which usually hides in caves. There's some of the body of the moray eel. This is one that hides in the sand, and it's a fairly big eel that hides in the sand and comes out only when it wants to catch something. This looks rather fuzzy, sort of, but the reason is that these things are way far away, and these are called garden eels. You can notice that the ones in the very background look pretty big and pretty tall, but the ones in the foreground are short. That's because they're really sensitive to anything coming near them, and they go back into the sand right away if anything comes near. And one time I was able to get close enough to actually take a picture so you can see it as an animal, you know, a snake, a eel of some kind. And there's a little hole over here that probably another one was living in, but this is just a very lazy one, I guess, or something slow. These sort of look like eels, but they're fish. They're regular fish. They swim in the ocean instead of squirming around the ground. And they are just very thin, and filefish are called, pipefish are called. These are seahorses. There are different color ones. There was also white ones. This grouper is one that the people at the little Cayman Island would take you around to different parts of the island at different days. And whenever they took you to this part, apparently this same grouper would always come out and visit the divers. And I don't know why. Usually fish stay away from divers, but this one didn't. Wow. These are a bunch of angelfish now. Angelfish are very common in aquariums, and they have different patterns on their body. And this one with the wallpaper body they all look the same. See, it's the same kind of body markings. But there's lots of other kinds of angelfish that have different body markings. There's a blue one with dots, and there's a queen angelfish, and there's one. It's called French angelfish. Every one of these will have these same vertical little stripes like that all along their body, these French angelfish. There's a barracuda, and again, this is sort of an odd thing about the barracudas. In this island, when you go dive from the boat into water, most of the time you would see just one of these barracudas right under the boat. And I don't know what they seem to be just following under the boat. I don't know if they tracked something or the boats do, but they some funny reason. This is a very small fish, a blenny, this little one here. And here's another one of blennies, small one. This is another small fish you can hardly see because it's almost translucent. and so they hide very well. It's a color gobi. And then if you go out of the water, when you leave the water, you see a lot of junk in it. And when you look close, it's lots of little fish. All that stuff is just right on the seashore, coming on the beach. And here's when your boat is going either away from out diving or coming back, and fairly often there are dolphins just swim alongside with it and just follow the boat or swim right next to it. And here's a few pictures of just one diver here. This scenes like this, you can't see these. In the water here, you wouldn't see anything. This thing would be completely blurred out by it. So you can't see anything that's far away than maybe 10 feet. And so this is far away, and it's of course lit by the regular light, not by the strobe light, because it's far away. And this is just the anchor line from a boat. But when you come up from diving, you have a lot of nitrogen in your blood, and you have to stop at certain depths to let the nitrogen go out, or you get decompression sickness or the bends. And so it's inconvenient to have to sort of swim around at a certain stay at say 15 feet depth for 3 or 5 minutes or something. So people usually go up these lines, and when they get to the depth they have to stop at, they just hold on the line and don't have to swim around. There's a fisheye view of the boat, and this is the ladders that you climb up on to get to the boat. And this is characteristic of this Dominica Island, this sort of odd one. Well, not too odd. There's a lot of volcanic islands. And this one there's lava or very hot rocks under the seafloor. And some of the water drips down into those hot rocks and boils and makes steam, and the bubbles come up like this. This doesn't do that much to the ocean, a few little hot bubbles, but this is our Boulder's hot tub. This is a hot tub in Dominica, and it's heated by the bubbles that come up, and it gets about the same temperature as our hot tub here. In fact, there are some of them get much, much hotter, and you can't get in. I think they have them in Yellowstone, though, too. Around this country, you don't have to go there to find them. This is what you do after you finish diving. Here are a few of the people that were on the boat with us last time, and this is sort of a sunset scene to the end of the description. So that's all.
The slide, you have the extra ones on with you?
Yeah.
Did you show the Holcomb?
See if I find it. See, this is a PC, and I'm not a PC
Okay,
person.
well, don't do it. He has a slide of Frank's seaweed.
Yeah.
So.
Oh,
I was
do you
going
have a
over my
microphone?
time with
No,
that, that's
people
why
want
I
to
had
talk.
to cut
I
out
don't
a lot
know
of
if you're up here.
big sections.
Is there anyone from the Education Committee with a microphone?
Right here.
Okay. Okay.
Anybody got questions for Dick? Wait for the microphone, please.
I just came back from Little Cayman in March.
Oh.
The lionfish have, your pictures are earlier than the lionfish invasion, but the groupers on Little Cayman have discovered how delicious the lionfish are. And now the groupers are pests in a way, because they would come and swim with us and we'd have to push them out of the way. Until
They're like people.
they are wonderful fish. It's wonderful coexistence. And the dive masters will hunt out the lionfish and get them out of the crevices with their fins. And the groupers go,
outstanding.
and get the
What you
lionfish
were
out.
expecting.
And that scourge is being taken care of by our wonderful groupers. And the one that you saw was either Ben or Jerry, who used to go underneath the arm of one of our dive masters whenever we went into Little Cayman.
Wow. I haven't been diving since about the last 10 years.
Any more questions? Anybody?
Did you see all those different fish just as you were going through the waters, or were they captured in some sort of way? I mean, there was such variety.
No, they're just all over. There's no capturing. They're just when you're, you go on a lot of dives. I've been on a couple hundreds of dives, and so they're different dives, but they're all just swimming.
Yeah.
It's very.
Why are the northern waters so murky and the Caribbean so beautifully clear?
Well, they're not quite as bad when you get way offshore, but near the shore, and we were near the shore, relatively near the shore in the Caribbean, they got a lot of algae up here, and I don't know why they have algae, they have one single cell algae down in the Caribbean. They don't have much, you don't see seaweeds very much at all down there. And I don't know, maybe it's just the coral reefs or that discourage it or something, I don't know. I don't know why.
Did you ever run into any dangerous fish like a shark? Or did the barracuda give you any
I've
trouble?
always, the person I used to go with did that all the time. I didn't. I mean, you can see sharks in the distance, but never on the dives where they intentionally get a bunch of sharks around you. And they do that, a lot of people do that, but I've always stayed away from dangerous things. I've never felt any danger when I've been in the water at all. And because I had a very good training at the beginning with at UNH. That's all, what can go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions? Dick, thank you. Don't forget, everybody gets a goldfish. All you have to do is go to the back of the room.
There's wine and refreshments in the back, and I'm gonna sort of move some chairs away from the back row so we'll have some room.
And these goldfish are not like the ones you had to swallow when you joined the fraternity.